Today, Met Service is just going to talk briefly on the current water situation on the island from a meteorological perspective, right? So, so far, persons have been noticing that they've been less rainfall occurring over the past few months. We just came out of a wet season that was not really as wet as we expected. It was actually a relatively dry, wet season. Hurricane activity was, thank God, we were spared the severe impacts of a major hurricane, but we did not receive as many. We were not affected by as many systems this 2025 hurricane season. From going forward now, I'll be comparing our current situation to our climatological average, which is from 1991 to 2020. That's a 30-year span. The 2026 dry season in St. Lucia is developing as a high-impact meteorological event with characteristics comparable to the severe droughts of 2020 and 2009 to 2010. Current atmospheric and hydrological conditions show significant departures from the 1991 to 2020 climatological average, indicating a heightened drought risk and intense pressure on national water resources. Current meteorological and hydrological conditions, the transitions from 2025 wet season to 2026, it was marked by a notable rainfall deficit. December 2025 failed to provide the expected transition moisture, with Hiwanura International Airport recording a 41% deficit with 58.3 millimeters of rainfall recorded, and George Charles recording about 28% deficit, about 92.8 millimeters of rainfall. One of the key drivers, climate drivers, which affects rainfall over our region, especially St. Lucia, we have temperature stress. Nighttime minimum temperatures have stayed elevated between 24 degrees Celsius and 26. It's been relatively cool because when you compare it to September heat season, peak heat season, where temperatures are in the range of about 29 to 30 degrees, the distinct difference for when you compare daytime and nighttime, you can see that nighttime minimum, though cooler, is still on the high side. So it's relatively warm at nights. This leads to increasing evaporation rates and domestic water demand. We have the atmospheric suppression. That means that there are bigger things out there that's really affecting the climate over us and affecting rainfall activity. One of these things is a strong North Atlantic subtropical high and is maintaining a persistent trade wind inversion. Now, all this jargon just means that the atmosphere is more stable. Likelihood of rainfall is a little bit less because there's not much agitation in the atmosphere to give us that instability, to give us that rainfall. Also, two persons have been hearing of La Nina and El Nino. And these two events or occurrences really affect the climate over the region, meaning that it tends to either give us a little bit more instability during our wet season or dry season, depending on which event is there. So if it's an El Nino, we tend to have drier conditions expected. If it's La Nina, we tend to have wetter conditions expected. And so far, the shift is for 75% likelihood of a midwinter transition from La Nina to ENSO, which is neutral phase, meaning that it's neither wetter than normal expected or drier than normal expected. It's just going to go based on our historical averages. Drought monitoring. So because of all of this notable lack of rainfall activity, the lack of the amount of rainfall that we've received during the wet season and start of the dry season, this has led to our predictions so far based on current observations, showing that short-term drought and long-term drought is evolving on the island. So short-term drought, we're looking at a period of about 3 months to 6 months. Shows that indicates that there is an evolving drought situation, most likely continuing since we're starting our dry season from December and going into the peak dry season, which is between February, March, and April. That conditions are gonna be expected to be less favorable for rainfall activity, and the drying will continue, and therefore an evolving drought situation is most likely. That means there will be stress on small rivers, streams, and ponds. In the long term, when we look at the 12-month period, we're looking at 12 months starting from December last year, no, sorry, from January to December, entire calendar year. And we're going back every year based on our historical data. We can see that rainfall for the upcoming season is showing that there is also an evolving drought for the long term. Significant impacts on large reservoirs and groundwaters are going to be expected. And how does that affect the agricultural sector? It's a high likelihood that because of an evolving drought, this is going to lead to increased soil moisture stress and risk of bushfires. So we expect some increase of dry grass everywhere that increases the risk of bushfires occurring, and that might spread, or you might have larger areas of bushfires occurring during our dry season. This is also going to have an impact on the air quality when you have smoke and a lot of other stuff burning in the atmosphere. I'll skip this one, the first part, because WASCO has not said that as yet, per se. I'll not overstep my bounds in this. So we're looking at the seasonal outlook from January to June 2026. While some near rainfall may occur in the immediate January to March, because for the past 2 years, during January and February, rainfall activity has been significantly higher. But this January and February, we're not anticipating as much activity as compared to the last 2 years. So April to June forecasts favor a drier than normal conclusion to the dry season, coinciding with the start of the heat season. The heat season is starting from April, and then temperatures will gradually increase into the peak heat season in September. Water resilience. The 2025 wet season delivered roughly 34% less rain than average, because the wet season typically provides 70% of the island's annual water. Reservoirs entered in 2026 in a stress state with very low resilience for a prolonged drought. Peak heat season, I already mentioned, is between August, September, and October. And this may further complicate water recovery in the 2026 wet season. And since we're going to be more concentrated on the first part of our dry season, we are doing a long-term forecast in anticipation of the peak heat season and into the middle of our wet season for 2026. The public is advised that water conservation, repair household leaks immediately and avoid non-essential water use. For example, power washing, using your garden hose. Storage, utilize rainwater harvesting systems to supplement the central supply. And for fire safety, exercise extreme caution to prevent bushfires, which are more likely in these cured dry vegetation conditions. And my conclusion, persistent dry and warmer than normal conditions will remain, and the dominant feature of the 2026 dry season. Coordinated water management and active public cooperation are essential to mitigate the socioeconomic impacts of this event. All I am saying is that we're expecting a drier than normal dry season. It might be one of the extreme ones that we've had in the past when you compare it. So we have to exercise as much water conservation as possible, at least from the start. And going as we gradually get into the peak of the dry season, we will go based on observations of what we've been receiving from our stations here in around George Charles, which are our manual monitoring stations, and we'll keep the public informed as we progress to see if there's any significant changes we'd like to inform the public about. But it's going to be, heads up, it's going to be a dry season. Thank you.
I just want to start off saying that the agency, we're encouraged by, the minimal rainfall we've seen from Thursday, yesterday, Sunday, and also this morning. We're hoping that it could defy the predictions and that we get more rainfall for the month, but we're always hopeful. Still in that segment, I just want to say that we are dependent on rainfall, right? And the WRMA and WASCO, we don't produce water. We manage the water resources in our system, and as WASCO also uses that water from the rainfall to produce potable water. So we only work with what we get. And that means we are always looking up to the heavens for our rainfall, right? As the director of the Met Services mentioned that we had a drier than normal wet season. And normally December and January tend to be the wetter months of the dry season. And we see that trend extending into the dry season where in December and January we haven't gotten the rains that we've expected. And what that means is from the wet season, WASCO has been sustained by our base flows, but those base flows have been low flows, right? And since we're continuing into that dry trend, it's just going to diminish and diminish. And looking at our river systems across the island, we're seeing discharge rates that we normally see towards the end of March in a good year, right? So that is very troublesome, very worrying to the agency and the ministry at large. So from our table here, we can see, like I mentioned, that normally December, January, we have satisfactory rainfall, and that's normally coming from a good year in the wet season. So what we have is an extension of water feeding our groundwater reserve, which sustains us during the dry season. But this year, we've not seen that. And that could be exacerbated by if we go into February and those rainfall volumes continue to be low. If we look at our 2023-2024 dry season, where we had declared our last water-related emergency, we realized for February we only got 70 millimeters of rainfall at basically at one of our critical watersheds, which is the Roseau watershed. And that is reflected in other watersheds across the island. So definitely, like the director of the Met Services mentioned, we're in a very dire situation at the moment. So what does that mean? We know that in the dry season, we're expecting lower than normal rainfall. That's expected, right? But what happens is the distribution of that rainfall. That is very critical because for our water supply system, the key here is soil conditions, looking at infiltration and percolation. We don't have natural or we don't have significant natural artificial storage. So definitely our main storage system is our groundwater aquifers across our watersheds. And that is impacted in terms of the soil conditions by rainfall. So that's the key factor here. So if soil conditions are not favorable for infiltration, but not only infiltration, but percolation, which goes down into the groundwater, then we're going to be in some serious trouble. So what I'm saying is that we may get rainfall, right? We may see that the place is still green, but from a hydrological perspective, that is not helping our water supply system. So that stays in the root zone, is used up by the trees, right? So just to give an example, looking at when we came out of our our dry season in 2024, where we had to declare water-related emergency, we can see the rainfall trends. And what that did from July, that was aiding our soil conditions to assist with infiltration and percolation. So during that period, we were still under a declared water-related emergency, but what happened, conditions were changing so that's to allow when we get a rainfall event, that water went down into the soil. We don't generally tend to want a high rainfall event where you see that the water levels in the rivers are very high, because unfortunately, that is not very advantageous to us. All that water just runs to the sea. So we prefer smaller rainfall events that actually goes down into the ground, so sustains our river systems, so which is most beneficial to WASCO. So you could see for the months of July, August, you see our rainfall patterns. So practically every day we had rainfall, and a lot of that went down into our groundwater system. Because unlike other Caribbean neighbors, our soil conditions are not such to take advantage of infiltration and percolation, right? We mostly made up of clays, so that kind of inhibits, the volumes of water that goes down into our system. So the distribution is very important to us. And this is what we normally see of the dry season, that you have the distribution is very wide. So you have a number of dry spells, dry days in between. And during that period, we have, with the heat, the wind, the humidity, conditions generally tend to get very dry quickly. So you may have a rainfall event today, and in 3 days' time, the place is already, you can see the changes in soil conditions, and also, the plants and the trees starting to adapt. So we expect that we have the number of dry days, the period of those dry days increase, right? So this is something that we're very mindful of, and then we have to check for. So moves me to the next segment, where we always have to speak about this rainwater harvesting, right? So just going back to those slides, what we see here with our graphs, each bar represents a rainfall event, right? And that's what rainwater harvesting is. Basically putting yourself in a position every time it rains, you capture that water. And like the slogan says here, you always win when you practice rainwater harvesting, right? And it rains every time of the year. Just going back to the chart, so you see we have February and March, it rains, right? Conditions may not be right for infiltration into the soil, but that is water that can be captured by anyone who practices rainwater harvesting. So we encourage and we urge our citizens to practice rainwater harvesting. You could install or expand your rainwater harvesting system, and that complements the potable water that we get from WASCO. So what that does in the end, it reduces or eliminates inconvenience at a household, at a business level for many persons. A lot of persons who don't have issues, water-related issues, many persons practice rainwater harvesting, right? So we encourage, and that's a critical measure to strengthen water resilience in the face of climate change. So like I would reiterate, that it rains any time of the year, even in the dry season, even when we're going through a water-related emergency, it rains. And what we normally tell persons, or what we want to make persons aware of, is that in the months of December going into January, where I mentioned that those are the wettest months of the dry season, that's the time to more or less start to fill all your rainwater harvesting systems, as well as your potable water supply from WASCO. So as we move into the dry season and we have incidents of rainfall, basically what it is a recharge of your rainwater tanks. Is basically you get a top up. So every time it rains, you capture that water. It's immediate and it's available to use, because a number of activities we do on a household level don't require potable water. Rainwater harvesting can be used for more than 50% or 60, 70% of what is done, talking on a household level. It could be for commercial or any other business as well, right? So we encourage persons, this is a time that we need to, and basically it's an investment in building water resilience. It is something that we need to do. Just like our northern neighbors, we have to do it, right? So I would encourage, and the ministry encourages persons to practice rainwater harvesting, because like I mentioned, we were encouraged by the rains that fell Thursday, yesterday, and today in many areas of St. Lucia. And that was water that was captured. That's water that can be used. So we encourage persons to practice rainwater harvesting, because on a watershed level for WASCO, that rainfall may not be advantageous to them, or they may have to wait weeks to actually get that water supply coming back into the river system. But on a household level, that is immediate, and that can be used. So our solution to where we're heading to in this dry season, as mentioned by the director of the Met Services, is to practice rainwater harvesting, as well as to expand storage of potable water. So the two complements each other, and then that builds a resilience and reduces an inconvenience as we try to mitigate the 2026 dry season, right? So, like I mentioned before, we're seeing a number of low flows in our river systems that we expect to see later into the dry season. So, if you look at Vanna, some of those flows, you could basically just, stand over the stream flow that's coming down into the river systems, right? Those flows, they're pretty much low flows, right? So ancillary in Tunis, Talvin, Pasias, we can see that in terms of the discharge rates, they're very low. So in that regard, we're going to continue working with our partners, WASCO and the Med Services, at this point in time on a weekly basis. So basically to discuss the situation and to see what measures can be taken in terms of ensuring that there is enough distribution to the population. We're hoping that we don't have to go into a water-related emergency, but in those conversations, those are things that we would have to discuss, right? So once again, I just want to tell persons that they have the power in their hands to assist, right, WASCO, in terms of ensuring that they have water. And one of that is the additional source, which is rainwater. We expect rain in the dry season. Irrespective of how bad it gets, we do expect incidences of rainfall, and we hope that persons will be in a position to capture that water. So with that, I thank you very much.
At the John Compton Dam between November 2024 and of course now we've seen slight differences in the amount of water, at least at the lake level. Since the beginning of the dry season, we've also seen a drop 2025 into 2026. We've seen a notice drop in production across all of our treatment facilities entering the dry season from that rainy season. That's a 10% drop, at least within the northern system, that accounts for about 16 million gallons of water. Within the southern system, we see a similar drop, about 10 to 15% drop in our production. When we compare that to 2024, going into 2025, it's even a greater number. That is about 20% drop in our production. That could account for about 29 million gallons of water. So what does that really mean for our public? What does that really mean for our households? That really means that we're going to experience low pressure systems and of course more service interruptions across that dry season.
The previous presenters would have indicated that this dry season is going to be a pretty rough one. Right now at the John Compton Dam, the spillway has stopped overflowing. Normally this would have happened in March. In the past, maybe 6-7 years ago, this would have normally started in March, but this has started in January. So it means that this dry season will be a tough one for us. But our job is to manage whatever reserves that we have to ensure that residents do get a supply of water and that they are not without water for too long. I know there are some cases where some residents are without water for a few weeks, but we try to do trucking, as the slide would indicate. We do trucking, we have to do community valving, and we have to repair leaks as quickly as possible. We also count on residents and customers to actually inform us if there is a leak anywhere, and we will try our best to repair this at the soonest, because the more water we are able to save, that's more water we have available consumers. Now, there are certain things that are just beyond us. Control of the weather is beyond us. The amount of rainfall that the reservoir is able to collect is beyond us. What is within our control is to manage whatever reserves that we have. Now, you would know that the John Compton Dam has not yet been dredged. We are still at a loss of 50% of its storage capacity. So whatever balance that remains, we have to manage this to ensure that it lasts us during the dry season or for the period of the dry season, and to be replenished during the rainy season. But as has been indicated earlier, the dry seasons are going to be getting worse. We can see from previous trends that every single year it gets drier and drier. Now, if a country that's growing with so many hotels and businesses, especially in the north, what solutions do we have for that? Okay, so we have desalination. I know this is something a lot of people didn't want to hear, but we have now come to the point where this is a must, and this must be a common feature in our conversations. We do not have a choice anymore. We have to go the desalination route. Countries that once had rivers like St. Kitts, Antigua, even though Barbados never really had rivers, but they had massive underground storage in terms of the aquifers. All these countries have gone the route of desalination. Folks, we don't have a choice. We have to feature desalination as part of our production system. Now, the desalination, although it's a much more expensive process, but there is something that it does that surface waters do not do. That is, it provides a degree of resilience that is irrespective of whatever climate event that happens. We could have a dry season that lasts years. Once you got a desalination plant, you always have water. So this is a kind of resilience that we need to build into our systems and for the country's sake as well. There are also 3 other projects that we want to do in the short to medium term. New filters at the Tibbles treatment plant. The plant currently has 10 filters, 4 from the first plant and 6 from the second plant. The 6 in the second plant needs rehabilitation. So we will be embarking on rehabilitating at least some of those within this year. So what that does is to also increase our filter run, meaning our frequency of backwashing is going to be significantly less. With less backwashing activities, that's more water available for customers. So we will be rehabilitating those filters. There's also the northern pipeline installation that we need to continue. You'd remember that in 2021, we installed almost 2 kilometers of pipeline from the Montgiro Gap to the Bonte Gap. If some of you saw the quality of the pipeline that was replaced, you would have seen that it's not in a good condition at all. So we will be continuing this project very soon from the Bonte Gap to the Gruzili Town Gap. So this is, I believe, the first of those 3 projects that will happen. We also have the raw water pipeline project. That is a must. That raw water pipeline is you can liken it to the main artery that leaves your heart. That's your aorta. This is what carries water from John Compton Dam to the Tibbles treatment plant and on towards the northern network. There's a 5-kilometer section of this pipeline that is probably some of the worst pipes that you could possibly see. You remember that just on the 5th of December, we had a rupture. Then on the 8th of December, we had another rupture. With all those ruptures, we experienced disruptions in the system and prolonged periods without water. So this section of pipeline has to be replaced. We are already in the process because the Caribbean Development Bank will be the one funding this project. But you know, there's a process with the Caribbean Development Bank, and this is what we're following. At this point in time, we are just preparing to get the no objection for the engineering consultants who will be reviewing the previous designs, and also to provide, to help with contract documents, bill of quantities, and all that, the rest, the other parts of it. So this is where we are right now. I just want to encourage consumers to conserve water, right? If we do not conserve, it forces us now to abstract more from the John Compton Dam, which is our only significant reservoir. If we have to abstract more, it means that the storage that is there will deplete faster. But we have a responsibility to ensure that that storage lasts us during the dry season. So the rationing could be worse if you do not conserve, because we have to take charge of that storage to ensure that it lasts us during the dry season. So as the director of the WRMA indicated earlier, continue with this rainwater harvesting, and we will encourage rainwater harvesting because rain can fall anytime. But we must have the facilities in place to be able to take care of those, to be able to collect that water when it falls. Okay, so I just want to encourage everyone to please conserve and try to harvest as much rainwater as you can whenever that situation arises. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Do you have any questions for Mr. Anthony since he's already at the podium?
Just one question for me. I mean, just going to the medium to long term relief. I mean, I came in during the presentation from the water management unit. I'm just sensing, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there seems to be a deliberate attempt to divert the real issues and put the onus on the general public in terms of conservation, rainwater harvesting, which is fine. But I would like to have a little more detail. I mean, WASCO have admitted it, the Minister of Infrastructure a couple of times admitted it, that the WASCO infrastructure is outdated. And we seem to be kind of like skirting around it and not really placing a lot of emphasis, because even now, if the water conditions or the weather conditions were to be favorable, we still have outdated infrastructure. I mean, when you look at, for example, Dennery North, the amount of leakage you see there on a regular basis, loss of water there, to my mind, is sort of criminal, to be quite frank, with the water leakage and what have you. I would like to have a little more detail about the long-term infrastructure. Again, I heard briefly you mention about what is happening in the north, the hotel and the expansion. That is a crisis, regardless of the weather patterns. But in terms of some real concrete talk about, okay, there's a $100 million loan to improve the infrastructure. Last year we heard about the Castries City, the change of the pipelines there. So I'm not getting the sense that WASCO is owning up to the fact that that infrastructure is way outdated and we need to address this once and for all. So I'd just like you to comment on that.
Absolutely no problem. You are correct in a number of the points that you raised in terms of the outdated infrastructure. We have started replacing some of our parts of our network in Castries. You remember sometime last year we replaced what was on the Chaussee Road. Okay, now we work together, the Ministry of Infrastructure. We have not been able to have the resources to replace as much of the pipe as we would like to. This is just the reality. We are plagued with a poor network. That did just not happen overnight. That happened from since the network was installed. There are certain areas in Castries where the network was installed since the 1940s, and it's still active. We have not been able to replace. You recall just over the weekend, there was a repair that we did just near Bank of St. Lucia between Bridge Street, Jeremy Street Junction. You remember the amount of water that we lost there. If you had seen the quality of the pipe that we had to repair, you would now get an appreciation of how bad it is. It is really bad, but we do not have the financial resources to effect those repairs. You spoke of Dennery just a while ago. Dennery was a case of poor design, not on our part, but on the contractors who actually designed and implemented that network. What happened with Dennery is that the pipes were under design, meaning that it could not take the amount of pressure that the system was supposed to handle. So what WASCO has been doing is, as fittings and pipelines become available, replace a section. You would have realized that we've done a significant bit of it, but there is still some remaining. Now, the worst part of all of this is that we replace with a better quality pipe, a more resistant pipe. So what that does, the whilst we will not get a brick where we replace, but the balance, you'll get bricks in those balances, because as you repair leaks, you also increase the pressure on the network and balance of the network, and this is what's happening in Dennery. But we will complete Dennery. We don't have a choice. We will complete. This is an embarrassment. I'll be honest with you. This is an embarrassment. We will replace it. Now, in terms of having a loan to have a significant replacement of infrastructure, we don't have that yet. Now, with regards to the northern corridor, the first section of pipeline that was replaced from 10 to Bontegab, this was a very important and significant replacement. The balance that needs to be installed, that's from the Bontegab to the Grosile Town Gap. Once this is done, this means that the trunk mid for Grosile would have been put in a tip-top condition to be able now to accept desalination. And if we go with desalination, not if, when we go with desalination, it will be in that corridor. So that means that section would be in a condition where it can receive a more expensive water, so the losses would be much lower in those areas. The rest of Castries City, government of St. Lucia, WASCO, we have to collaborate to replace. Because you would hear that the streets in Castries would need to be repaved and everything. Yes, okay, it needs repaving, but you cannot repave this unless you replace the infrastructure that's under there. This is a serious matter that we have to deal with, and it requires collaboration. It requires significant financing. It's not like, a utility pole where you just string wires from pole to pole. We have excavation, we have a whole lot to do.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Yes, Liz, you mentioned the medium to long-term measures. Now, you'll be aware that the northern amount now is becoming more commercial, more residential. You have hotels, you have restaurants, you have malls, more housing, more construction. How would you prepare for such, an eventuality? That means there will be more water will be needed, more supplies. The trucking is okay, but this would be regular business place in the hotels. How would you manage to adequately supply, this influx, this increase in water?
Yes.
In water
Thank you. Good question. Trucking is not sustainable. I'll be frank with you. Trucking is not a sustainable way of providing water to people. Right? Our production must increase. Currently, the demand is higher than the supply. Right? Those measures that we put in there, the desalination, new filters, that tables treatment, the northern pipeline, raw water, all that will benefit the northern corridor. All of this. Okay? But one at a time, I guess. The northern pipeline will be the first phase. The second one will be the filters, and the raw water pipeline will be the third project. But desalination is a must. It must happen. Not with the trends that we see from that office. Not with what WRMA has been saying. It must happen. We must go desalination, or else we're gonna be in problems.
So when you talk of desalination, is there a special plant?
Yes.
Special resource?
Okay, let me just explain it to you. It's a process of essentially converting salt water into fresh water. It does this through very high pressure and through a very complex system. Essentially, you would have an intake. Sometimes it can be a pipe floating in the sea, or it can just be a well. Then it's pumped into filters, media filters, and then to the desalination filters. It's energy intensive, but you get a top quality product at the end of it. And you can get plants, to produce millions of gallons of water for you. All right? It comes in modular. So how we were looking at it, we're looking at it this way. There are times that we will get more rain than usual. So we would want a system where we can reduce on desalination and supplement more from our freshwater side. And when freshwater side reduces, we can increase on desalination. So we want that kind of flexibility so that we are always in a position where we have an adequate supply of water to customers.
So, coming off of it, what is the message that you want to tell St. Lucia? Are we seeing a crisis? What message would you like the general public to come out of here today?
I'm not sure about a crisis, but we want St. Lucians to know that we are going into a dry season, and a really dry season, drier than usual. So would encourage conservation, because that's the very least that they can do. Encourage conservation and put in infrastructure for rainwater harvesting whenever that rain comes. Okay, and we also want to encourage St. Lucians that, listen, there is hope at the end of it, right? There are plans afoot to make the situation better. It's not like this is a hopeless situation and that we have to depend on rainfall all the time, and if it doesn't rain, everybody in trouble. No. There are plans afoot to improve the water supply to residents.
Ernest, you had a question?
One question from me. As it relates to the plans for desalination, are they going to work in tandem? Because you did fresh water and desalination.
Yes.
And would it be something, if we're having issues now as it relates to infrastructure, are we going to refocus towards desalination? And then
No, we are going to be working in tandem. We have to think of our network. We have to do the desalination, because water desalination is to bring extra water. Because currently, even if we had all our network intact, I still believe we do not have enough fresh water.
so it would be kind of background as opposed to.
Yes, yeah.